All right. Thanks so much, Greg. I really appreciate that introduction. I'm glad you're excited because Kisha and I really are too. I'm Susie Boles, and I'll just kick things off by saying I'm an instructional designer and the assistant director of our instructional design unit at UNCG Online, located in Greensboro. And really enjoyed last year's App State Free Learning Conference and have learned a tremendous amount from today's earlier presentations. I'm glad to share a portion of what we do today and really invite some discussion at the end of our presentation. I'd like to just say briefly a little bit about our unit. UNCG Online develops about 41% of the online courses at UNCG. The remainder are developed by individual instructional designers attached to a college or a department. But our unit actually works with all disciplines across the university. So we've developed courses in kinesiology, music education, nanoscience, social justice, dance appreciation, economics, and a myriad of others. We are primarily a non-academic unit at this time, but we just house 2 academic programs, one of which is our Master's of Arts in Applied Arts and Sciences, and the other is the newly accredited Bachelor's of Science in Integrated Professional Studies. And the way we are able to accomplish what we do, let's see, in the last year we developed about 40 online courses, which is pretty significant. And some of those are overhauls of old courses that needed some remediation and updating. Others are brand new courses that had never been online. Some were, conceptualized for the online environment, whereas others existed as face-to-face courses that we essentially converted and enhanced to be online. And so to develop about 40 courses, we have to have a really rigorous approach to how we first meet with our subject matter experts and plan for the courses. And that's essentially where the somewhat silly title of our presentation comes from. Proper prior planning prevents poor performance. It's something my husband always says, and it's something I found to be very true in instructional design and online education. And so this whole presentation is going to be about how we plan for those. Another quick note, because we're only talking about the planning today, there's much more, of course, that happens after the planning with our unit. We have a team of multimedia experts, copy editor, coders, a web designer and graphic designer, and then other instructional designers like Kisha and myself. And after the course is built, we follow Quality Matters standards in our courses, and we test our courses very rigorously prior to launch for functionality, accessibility, design, copy editing sweep, and more. One other note is we primarily develop courses in Canvas, but what we're going to talk about today is going to be relevant regardless of what LMS you use. And we also develop courses in WordPress, so that serves as a kind of a companion website to the Canvas courses. And we're happy to answer questions about that. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Kisha and let her introduce herself and then talk about what we're going to cover today.
Okay, well, my name is Kisha Carmichael-Motley, and I have been an instructional designer probably for about 6 years now. And I totally am an accidental instructional designer. I read that book a number of times, but the best thing that I think about instructional design is that you get to learn so many different things from so many different subject matter experts and learn different perspectives. So I'm a lifelong learner, so that's one of the favorite parts of being an instructional designer for me. Things that we'll cover today: why do you want to use backwards design, and how does it allow you to be a little more effective in your development process? Useful ways to organize conversations around the development meetings, and what are some of the specific questions that you need to ask your faculty members about the course, their experience with online teaching, and everything like that. What are some ways that you can adapt those questions to that process, and how you can apply backwards design to that process with those questions. And then at the end, we'll take any questions that you have about any of the steps in the 3 steps process that we present to you today.
All right, thanks, Kisha. And just want to kick things off by talking about why planning matters and give you a brief primer on backwards design. Many of you who may be joining us, if you're instructional designers, this could be a very familiar term to you, but if not, it's something we like to educate our faculty on. And so love to always kind of talk about this as the backbone of where our planning process comes from. So in a nutshell, backwards design, as defined by Wiggins and McTighe in their book, Understanding by Design, is a 3-stage process. You identify your desired results, then determine what evidence it'll take to reach those, and then plan the learning experiences and instruction. So it sounds very logical, but some of our faculty find it to be pretty radical, because what they often are more accustomed to doing is starting with the content they have, starting with that textbook, and then working their way to the assessments and finally the learning objectives that would best match those. So instead, we find ourselves finding much more improvement with faculty teaching experiences and with students achieving their learning outcomes if we start with the end in mind. Start with the learning objectives first, then move toward assessment, and lastly, address what content is needed to reach those desired learning objectives. So let's see, one of the reasons that this matters is this is supported by research. And so Wiggins and McTighe cite numerous studies from the 90s and 2000s on how this allows for more authentic pedagogy and alignment with assessments. And when many public schools had adopted this backwards design in their curriculum development, there was improved academic achievement for all students, and especially lower performing students. So I think that that's a main reason that we follow it, is it is evidence-based. We also really are appreciative of how backwards design avoids irrelevant content. Rather than thrust an entire textbook towards students, many of which might have supplemental pieces of content that aren't exactly tied to learning objectives. This way allows faculty to more specifically select pieces of content that'll match with their learning objectives and avoid busy work or irrelevant content or redundant content. And so this allows them to hone the content of their course to specifically match those learning objectives. And we know that many students are trying to work quickly in their online courses, and this way allows them to really focus in on what content is most critical for them to achieve learning objectives. Let's see. This also reduces rework. As an instructional designer, Kisha and I are both responsible for developing a budget prior to developing the online course. So we have to account for the multimedia that will be used, whether we bring in actors or do a green screen and editing time, whether students are going to need to buy their own textbooks or we're going to find creative ways to provide that for them, the labor time for our designer, etc. So by planning in the beginning, we are going to reduce the rework of changing our mind or finding out things that would have worked better that we didn't initially anticipate. So that again echoes the title of our presentation of why proper prior planning prevents poor performance. It also anticipates the needs of the students and, as I stated before, results in better learning and supports the teaching. So that is our rationale for why this process we're about to share with you is important. And I just wanted to focus on this visual that we're going to use throughout the presentation. This is our 3-step meeting process, and we're going to go into detail about what happens in each of these meetings. And as Kisha mentioned, we're going to lay out the specific questions that we ask, and we hope that this will be interesting to you to see how we're able to replicate this approach so that we can accomplish, like we did last year, 40 courses developed in a year by really having a consistent planning approach that gives us as much information up front about the course as we can possibly get. I have chosen a circular diagram because there is some flexibility in this. Sometimes some of the questions that were not able to be addressed in meeting 1 we'll get to those in meeting 2. And we're always, always revisiting the learning objectives established in meeting 1. So that's why it's a circular diagram, is we're continually revisiting those and checking along the way, are we aligning everything with those initial learning objectives? And so you'll see this diagram throughout. And for now, I'm going to hand it over to Kisha to talk about meeting number 1.
Okay, so the first planning meeting, you are going to usually, of course, start with just introductions and introducing your faculty member to the overall process. So we tell them, you know, there are 3 meetings. There's an opening for more meetings if necessary, but there are 3 main meetings. The first meeting, course context, learning objectives, assessments is the second meeting, and then the course outline and the meat to kind of add to the bones there for the third meeting. So then we start focusing on what it is that we will talk about in this first meeting. So you want to make sure that you are asking questions of the faculty, like, have they taken an online course before? Has the course that they are developing with you been offered online before? Will this be the first time? And then you'll get an idea of what the course will look like going forward. So you'll also need to ask questions that have to do with the number of expected enrollments. What are the prerequisites for the course? Is there another course that we also need to look at those student learning goals and outcomes to make sure that we are carrying them over or they are being added to this course? So once you get through those basic getting to know you kind of questions, I would categorize them as, you move to the student learning outcomes, student learning goals. And there you just want to speak with your faculty and ask them questions. Were the student learning goals written by them, or was it a department mandate that they were handed those particular student learning outcomes? What do they believe that the students are supposed to get from the student learning outcomes that have been given to them or they have created? We kind of walk them through and help them to process and analyze what it is that they are looking for their students to be able to do, because we know that student learning outcomes are supposed to be performed and they have to be measurable. So there have to be conditions as well as criteria so that you know that your students are learning what it is that they are supposed to be learning, and they can demonstrate to you what those things are. So those are just some of the questions that we ask in that meeting. And another big part of that meeting is also allowing your faculty member to kind of speak to the passion that they feel for that particular subject. A lot of times you'll learn that there are things that the faculty member are interested in the students knowing how to do, and have taught students in the past, how to do things that just came out of their passion for the particular subject. So those are all absolutely wonderful opportunities to kind of talk them through those student learning outcomes. This meeting usually lasts about an hour, depending on how verbose your faculty member is. But after this meeting is over, we generally type up a document that lets them see the things that we talked about. And it also gives them a bit of a homework assignment. So to prepare for the second meeting, the faculty members are to kind of think through their assessments. What do they want their students to be able to do? Are there steps and phases that their students are supposed to go through in order to show them that they know how to perform a particular task or to display a particular skill? And so we give them that homework assignment with those notes. Then we move into the second meeting, which is our assessments meeting. And you always want to make sure that in your assessments meeting that you are keeping your student learning objectives at the front of the conversation. So one of the best things to do is in the beginning is to revisit those learning objectives, those student learning goals, revisit them, make sure that your faculty and yourself are still on the same page as to what it is that the students are supposed to know how to do. And that we are clear as to what each student learning outcome is supposed to kind of produce and show, so that we know that when we're building these assessments, when we're having the students actively doing things, graded or ungraded, that they are meeting those assessment, those alignment, or they're aligning with their student learning objectives. So one of the best things that that we have done in the past is that we've just created a simple alignment chart. So you'll write all of your student learning goals up on the board, and you'll number them based on whatever order that the faculty has come up with, or whatever system that you have created. And as you are creating each assessment, the questions that you're asking are, what student learning goal does this particular assessment adhere to? So you want to make sure that there is an answer on that list of student learning outcomes that aligns with that assessment. Yes, there are things that students sometimes do that might not align perfectly, but they will eventually get to that student learning outcome. So that those are the types of things that you want to do. You want to make sure that you have an alignment there. When you're thinking about the assessments that you're working with your faculty with, questions that need to be asked are, is there a final project? Can the final project be broken down into steps so that it covers the course of the semester or a portion of the semester? So you can kind of scaffold your assignments across the semester. It makes it, for online learners, it makes it a little easier to accomplish what it is that you want them to accomplish in a more meaningful and impactful way. You want to make sure that you ask your faculty about what assessments have they presented in the past. What was it about those particular assessments that they liked? What was it about it that they did not like? Did they feel that they were getting they were aligning those assessments with those student learning outcomes? Were they getting from their students what they wanted to get? Or did they go halfway through the semester with an assignment and say, you know what, this is not working this particular time. Let's revisit it and change it around a bit. So we ask those questions and we work around those types of ideas. If your faculty member is interested in a particular type of assessment, but they've never performed that type, like a case study or something like that, if you have an example from a past course that you can show them, to kind of show them how it is that the case study works, and kind of make it apply to their particular course. Showing examples from other online courses for faculty members to see are a wonderful way to create brand new ideas, but also to give access to those things that we know that are tried and true and that work every time. This meeting usually lasts about an hour and a half to 2 hours, again, based on the, how robust your particular faculty member is. But from this meeting, again, there'll be notes sent about what was spoken about, the assessments, and how they align to the student learning outcomes that have been decided from that first meeting. When the faculty members leave the second meeting, they are also given another homework assignment. And in that assignment, they are to bring their calendar for the next meeting, because they're going to kind of make a calendar of how they'll plan out their work going forward. you can ask your faculty to kind of write out their content outline. How many units do they usually believe that they would cover? What are the topics? Some of the subtopics. They don't necessarily have to have the specifics of this, but you kind of want to get them thinking about how they organize their course from start to finish. And then you move into the third meeting, and I'm going to hand it over to Susie.
All right. Thanks, Kisha. And we're going to talk about the third meeting. And I just wanted to say a brief note that I did in the chat send out the link to the handout that lists all the questions that Kisha was just describing from each of our meetings. So that may help you to follow along and to, again, take that back and adapt it for your own practice. So now we're going to move into talking about meeting 3, the big bad third meeting, the one that caps off our approach here. So as I mentioned, this is a circular process. So I usually kick off this meeting by reiterating those learning objectives, which I saw in the chat, sometimes the faculty isn't coming to meeting number 1 with those learning objectives all sketched out. So that is part of our role, as Kisha mentioned, to work with them and to really ensure that those learning objectives are written in a way that is specific and measurable and observable. And that's often part of our role there in meeting 1. So here in meeting 3, we kick it off, we remind ourselves of the SLOs. Then we also remind ourselves of the assessments that we brainstormed in meeting planning number 2. And now is our chance to bring it all together and talk about how we're going to make this happen. So as part of their homework, the faculty often come in with some thoughts on the course outline. Whether this is going to be a 7-week course or a 15-week course, or if it could be both. Sometimes we have courses that are offered in the summer and also offered in a full semester. So we think about the pacing of the student work that's going to need to happen on a weekly basis. So we create this course outline that accomplishes where those assessments are going to fall during the semester, and then where the units of content are going to align with those assessments. We also ask them targeted questions regarding the design and multimedia they may require. And that's part of what our unit offers. Like I mentioned, we have a graphic and web designer. We also have a multimedia team. But whether you have those resources or not, it's very helpful to involve the faculty or your subject matter expert in those decisions for the course, so that they can be invested in how the course looks and feels and in creating those multimedia objects. So our designer usually comes in with a standard list of questions. She asks them are there some core visuals or metaphors that they often refer to throughout their course? Or are there any cliches that they really want to avoid? Sometimes there are misleading images associated with that discipline or with that course, and the instructor really wants to make sure that that imagery is not a hallmark of this course. Other times there are areas that especially need to be pointed out. Often faculty just tell us, we really want to see diverse imagery in my course. If we're going to use photography, I want to ensure that it is inclusive and representative of all the students I might have. And so that's something we pay special attention to for all courses, but that's often a request that we receive. And we walk them through what we're going to do with the design. As part of our commitment to creating accessible materials, we walk them through what it means to create alt text for images, and we enlist their help early on in writing long descriptions for complex charts or diagrams that, I can try to describe, but it'd be much better if they could proactively write that description for us. So we kind of educate them as to the importance of that, and just describe what those accessible considerations are from a design standpoint. For multimedia, often we have a lot of instructors who leap at multimedia as something that they feel will dazzle students and be interesting, or they might even perceive that it'd be easy, for their online course. They may say, I teach a face-to-face version of this course, just come and film my lectures. And we often walk through the pros and cons of those approaches and explain that with an online course, it's better if we develop the multimedia specifically for that environment so that the online student doesn't feel that they are, watching another class, but they feel part of the class. And so we walk through, again, the learning objectives. Is the multimedia needed? Are we demonstrating something that'll be better demonstrated audio visually than via text? And we walk through the cons. If you create everything in multimedia, everything in video, it's a lot harder to update later. So we think about the maintenance issues of creating multiple videos. We also walk through, again, the accessibility considerations. So we have a process for captioning and transcribing videos. We have a partner named Caption Sync that we work with to do so at an affordable cost. So we let the faculty know that's going to happen, and it would help us if these videos were scripted up front. And that also helps to cut down sometimes on the length of videos. So again, the whole point of this is to bring it all together, connect the learning objectives with the how we're going to develop this course, and walk through all these considerations and let the faculty know what we're doing and how they can assist us. So finally, we create a development schedule, because again, we're trying to create these courses in a timely fashion and keep them within budget. And we want to work with the faculty's schedule. So we ask them, over the next few months, when are you going to conferences, and are you planning to take any vacation time off? What other kind of irons in the fire do you have that take priority? How can we work with you to make this an accomplishable goal? Because we don't want this to be onerous. We want this to be something they're excited about. And if we know the other plans they have, then we can help to plan our due dates for that. So we work with them to create a development schedule, and we let them know, again, as I mentioned, from the beginning, that we will be doing testing after we create this. So that's a lot to do in one meeting. And that's why this meeting is sometimes 2.5 hours with breaks. But we try to make it interesting, again, by showing examples, as Kisha mentioned, showing a multimedia reel, showing design examples so they can see what's possible, and they get excited about that. And we also bring in our web designer, we bring in our multimedia experts so that they can hear directly from the experts. And that's often very interesting and will inspire them with some new ideas. So that's essentially meeting 3. One other tip that we wanted to share is with that course development schedule. Often it seems that it would make sense to just say, let's have unit 1 due first, let's have unit 2 due second. Maybe you have a unit that's submitted every 2 weeks. But if you have already identified in this meeting that there are going to be some bigger learning objects, some interactive branching case studies, or some series of videos, it helps to front load those more complicated items which are going to take more development time earlier. So instead you may say, please plan to submit your video script for the case study by this date, and then you may have unit 1, 2, and 3 due. So it's not always that the faculty are developing their course content in order. And that's something that sometimes, it takes a little bit of thinking for them because they're thinking about it in a more linear way. But we do find that really helps the development schedule, and, just helps our budget too if we think about it up front. So let's see. And you have the questions in the handout. Let me see if I'm able to pull that up at the same time. Yes, you have the questions in the handout that we're typically asking in that 3rd meeting. We also bring our copy editor in to talk about how we are going to copy edit, because she uses usually kind of a modified Chicago style, and so she talks about that and talks about how we'll deliver feedback. We often do Word docs with track changes, or we'll do Google Docs using suggesting mode and commenting, and that really helps her. And helps the faculty to kind of be on the same page and ensure that they know what to expect when they see those comments come back. Let's see. And the homework after that meeting is the faculty goes away. They have their schedule, so they know what's due first, and they're going to begin working on that. And we communicate the results of kind of all 3 of these meetings to the team at large and to our director, submit the final budget. we also create a document that says, here's an agreement of what we'll do, and here's an agreement of what the faculty do, and we send that out so they can sign it, and everybody's on the same page with kind of who's doing what. And then we begin setting up the course shell and firing away on all the many tasks involved. So that is, in a nutshell, our 3 planning meetings. And for the most part, we follow those to a T. And usually the meetings happen within 1 to 2 weeks of each other. So, you have a meeting one Wednesday, maybe you have the second meeting the following week on Wednesday, maybe the third meeting the following week on Friday or something. It just depends on, again, what's happening in that person's schedule. And it also depends on, the time they need in between meetings to kind of be thinking through some of these processes. And again, the content development doesn't happen until after that third meeting. So it's not like we're asking them to come to that third meeting with all their content written out or all their readings selected. That process begins after the third planning meeting. And I want to say, again, there's some flexibility on the time that some of this takes. Some meetings are shorter, some meetings are longer. Sometimes faculty will visit from a distant location, they'll fly in, and so it's just better for them if we can accomplish all 3 meetings within a week. But in general, we have 3 meetings, and they all happen within 1 to 2 weeks of the previous one. So some key takeaways. I'll say it one more time just because I get a kick out of it every time we say it, but proper prior planning prevents poor performance. The more that you can work together with your subject matter expert to really outline what the course should be and to really try to put on paper what their vision is for the course, the more everybody can work together to really brainstorm great ideas and take the course to the next level. And make sure that it represents our best standards for online pedagogy of alignment with learning objectives, so that the learning objectives lead the assessments, which lead the content. For all those reasons that I stated before, that it avoids redundancy and extraneous content, and that results in the better learning for the students and better teaching experience for the instructor. Flexibility, like I mentioned, the meetings may not all happen rigidly in what we've said, but those are, in our experience, the best kind of durations for each of those meetings, and a really good flow for asking those questions. Obviously, we ask follow-up probing questions, and it becomes more of a conversation than any kind of interview. And then, you may have to ask more follow-up questions, and a lot of times people change their minds. So they'll kind of give you what sounds like a definitive answer in one meeting, and then by the next meeting they've done some reflecting, maybe the examples you showed inspired some new thoughts. And so, we always want to be flexible and work with them, but if you can begin and initiate these kind of conversations in those 3 planning meetings, we've just seen great things happen, and it's become our go-to method for the planning process for our online courses. And so lastly, we would love to hear if there are any questions. We tried to specifically leave some time so that people could share with us your approaches, or ask us particular questions about what we shared today. And we're just really excited to have a conversation now.
Great. This is Greg again. So the mics were muted while she was sort of in presentation mode there. So feel free, if you have a question, you can click on the little microphone icon at the bottom left of the Zoom window to unmute yourself and ask a question. I'm going to start with the first one, if I can. How many, in what you would regard as a typical kind of course development project, how many people from your office wind up being involved?
Kisha, do you want to take that one, or should I?
Well, usually there's the head ITC or the project manager, and we usually will ask 2 other ITCs from our office to join in those planning meetings. So there's more brain power in the room, kind of thing. So there are 3 ITCs that are involved there. There's a coder involved. There's a graphic designer involved. And if the multimedia team is involved, it depends on the scope of the multimedia. If they need, 2 or 3 people. So at the most, it would
the copy editor too.
Yeah, and the copy editor. So we're less than 10 people but everyone is only speaking to their particular area of expertise. The head ITC is the project manager, so they are the liaison for the entire process and for all parties involved. So most communication kind of works through that individual. So.
Okay, great. When you guys wind up with a product, are you signed on currently for any kind of quality assurance kind of review stuff? Like, I know here we're a Quality Matter school where we do a review. You know, you get a content expert does a peer review. There's a technical review, those kinds of things. Do you have a process for that in place there?
That's actually part of our testing process. When Susie mentioned the after all of the course has been developed, and we've kind of gotten to the end and we have this final project, we have a very rigorous testing process, and that we have individuals that do testing for general functionality. Also, we have other ITCs in our office that go through to make sure that from an instructional design standpoint, it makes sense. So those student learning goals, those assessments, all of that is all in alignment. And in doing that, we also we don't do a formal quality matters check where they would actually, present to receive the actual gold star, but we do adhere to those standards for all of our courses, so that all of our courses that are developed with our particular team absolutely go through that quality matters rubric, and we adhere to specific ones that the university mandates that we have to, but our goal is to make sure that we adhere to all of them on top of
Great.
I'll just piggyback off what Kisha said. So we share the quality matters, we discuss quality matters with the faculty during these planning meetings, and then like she said, we ask usually another ITC to go through the course and look at quality matters standards, and we have a checklist for that. We also check for accessibility. So we ask somebody else to go through, they use a screen reader. We also do general functionality. Like she said, does everything work? Do all the videos play? All the links working? Is this working on multiple browsers? Is it working on a phone or tablet? Is it responsively displaying? And we also do a copy editing sweep and a design sweep. So it is a very rigorous testing process, but it really helps us to make sure that we've caught everything and provided the best learning experience possible for students.
Great, that's really helpful. Let me point you to the chat. I see you got.
I was going to say
I see a lot of questions. I finally figured out how to pull it up. So
down at the bottom.
Where do we start?
Well,
Let's start with the last three at the bottom, maybe.
Okay, I can answer Donna's real quick.
Okay.
Donna, I completely agree. Planning a good online course does often take longer than planning a face-to-face version of the same course. What I've often told faculty who are developing an online course for the first time is that the distribution of your work is different. For an online course, we strongly recommend developing the entire course prior to it starting. So all of the development is done in the months prior to the semester. And so by the time your course starts and the semester opens, then you can really focus on your announcements and giving feedback to students and making those personal connections and really being involved. But you don't have to be developing the lectures or developing the assessments because that's already done. And so your next question is, does your campus provide any course release or extra payment? That is determined by the department or the school. The answer is yes. They often do grant like a course load release. I forget exactly what they call it. Or they do provide a stipend to that faculty person to develop that course. Our whole working and developing and the majority of our budget is just, our unit is part of the university. And so the department doesn't pay our unit anything additional for that, but they do often pay that faculty person a stipend or offer them a course release for one or two courses.
The other question is how long once the planning phase is over, an average, how long does the faculty have from development phase to the launch of the course? In the past, we attempt to make sure that courses are completely developed through the development process, have been tested, and we've also done a retrospective. We've done a meeting with the faculty member to work with them to onboard them for being able to perform all of the duties that they would need to for their particular course about a month before the course is actually to go live. Now, that is not always the case. We have developed programs for departments, and we end up developing courses that will not be offered for a year or maybe two. But for the most part, most of the time, the courses are usually given to the faculty with all the information that they need and to have to launch a month out. And the project manager, ITC, who developed the course with that faculty member is a resource for that faculty member through their first semester offering.
And sometimes it'll take 5 to 6 months, and like Kisha said, sometimes it's a year in advance. It kind of depends on what that faculty has going on and how early we can start the development given our other projects in the pipeline and when their course is scheduled to go live. Zach, you said, do you provide recommendations for how to best engage with students through discussion boards during these meetings, or do you do that basically after the meetings? We do. Usually during those meetings, you could get any kind of question, especially for faculty who have never taught online before or who have taught online before and just curious to see kind of what are the best practices, what have we heard from other faculty. And so that does often come up during the planning meetings, but then they have us as a resource during the whole development, and as Kisha just said, for the first semester that the course is offered. And so yeah, they'll often call or ask us questions, either as things come up or as they think of them. And so it's a mix. It's during planning meetings and after.
Megan asked a question about whether faculty are required to work with our particular unit to develop their online courses. At UNCG, it is not a requirement. Every unit has one or two ITCs in their department, the instructional designers that they can partner with to develop their online course. Since we do have the Quality Matters rubric and we do own the license for that, the courses that move from face-to-face to online, if they work with an ITC in their particular department, they must go through that process and go through that check. But if they are just interested in their course being on online, they are not required to go through our particular department.
I see a new question from Donna. Who owns the course once it's developed? So that is, for us, we often have these agreements that are dual ownership agreements. So the faculty person owns all the work that they did on the course, and in the event that they should ever leave the university or would like to teach the course at another university, they can actually request us to make a copy of that site, and happy to do that. But the university also owns that course and can offer it ad infinitum and have another person teach it. So usually that's an agreement that is signed from our unit and also from that faculty person, and both own it, if that answers your question. That's your understanding too, Kisha, right?
Yes, there's co-ownership there. Trying to make sure that we answered.
Did we get everything? Greg, do you see any other questions on there?
Did we miss anyone?
Thank y'all for these good questions.
Yeah.
It's hard to decide what to include and what not to, but
right.
It's great to see,
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just say to everyone, I see a lot of people have mics connected. I know once you sort of get in the chat mode, you're just in chat mode and you're keyboarding and you don't want to turn your mic on, but you can feel free to wake that mic up and speak out loud. But yeah, I think you've gotten through most of the things in the chat. I see a colleague saying that they wish they could get hooked up with some of that sweet summer cash to teach. And I was like, me too. Are you guys on 12-month contracts? You guys?
We're salaried.
Yeah,
So,
we're
yeah.
salaried. a month,
Yeah. So yeah, that's my problem teaching in this, with it's like an EPA administrative job. So if I teach in the summer, it's like, hey, well, you're just
You're here.
you're here. Go ahead
That's
and do
right.
it, dude.
Absolutely.
All right, I'll try out a microphone, I guess.
All right.
And
Especially
just
since you have a voice that sounds like a DJ.
I know.
you caught me. I was on radio for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Can you just say "in a world" for us?
In a world where
There we go.
anything is possible.
Yes, thank you.
My best Don LaFontaine.
Oh,
Yes,
love
rest his
it.
soul.
Love it.
I never hijacked a conference before. That was fun.
Take it away.
Okay. Just for your interest, interestingly, my particular institution doesn't approve any new faculty with full-time pay in the summer. So this past summer, I taught a full-time load for part-time pay,
Wow,
which was interesting.
that's interesting.
Sure.
Well, I had some other words for it. But anyway, do faculty you work with ever express surprise after the fact at how much heavier the workload is to teach an online course? And what adjustments do you find they have to make as a result of that?
It's a great question. The initial answer is yes. Many of them are surprised, and again, what I often tell them is the distribution of work is often different for a face-to-face course than an online course. With an online course, we're trying to front load as much of the development work as we can before the course even starts, so that they don't have to worry about finding readings or creating assessments or writing lectures or finding imagery to support their points or anything like that. We try to have the entire course built so that on day one of the course, they can really focus on interacting with their students. Then the questions, even when that's done, yes, the time management of interacting with their students can be very different. So what we often encourage is setting boundaries, stating upfront, which is one of the Quality Matters standards, what your anticipated turnaround time is going to be for responding to emails and for giving feedback on assignments. So if you can set boundaries for yourself and say, I'm not necessarily going to respond to you within the next hour or even within the next day, but I'm generally going to follow this turnaround time, that helps. Some of our instructors get a lot of success with having virtual office hours. So they post that in their course and try to make it really clear. Often they do set boundaries too on how long they'll entertain questions before an assessment or an exam. So they may say there's a cutoff for asking questions about an exam. I won't respond to any more questions about the exam, 3 hours before the exam's due or a day before the exam's due. So setting boundaries like that can help a little bit. New instructors who come in and they have the best of intentions. They want to support their students and answer every question that comes their way. They can get very overwhelmed very quickly with the amount of communication that online students will send them. So the last thing I would say is that we often recommend other tools for communicating. So if you're finding you're getting the same question from 4 individual students via email, rather than email those 4 students individually, post an announcement. Say, I've gotten the question from multiple of you that this is an issue. So trying to utilize the announcements and other kind of group communications rather than individual emails can sort of help. I mean, you still respond to the email. You still say, I've gotten your question. I'm going to post an announcement about it. But that kind of can help a little bit with organizing the workload. But, we've found, just as other research studies have found, that teaching online courses does take more time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to say, Vance, if I send you a script for my next welcome video, could you just record it and then I'll sit at my desk and lip sync it? That would be awesome.
That's awesome.
If you will present me with an address to send my invoice, I'll be very happy to.
Love it. I love it.
I do take all major credit cards.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
That is so funny.
Hi, I have a question.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, it is actually regarding if you're consulting in terms of designing like lesson courses, but training courses as well, and let you only have just yourself and maybe a couple of people helping. How do you kind of manage, I guess, the planning process with a handful of people? Like if it's just yourself and maybe two other people, in terms of like timeline and I guess being very realistic.
Yeah. Kisha, I really feel like you can speak to this one well because you've had to undertake a number of those WordPress conversion projects where
Yeah.
you are really the person doing it all. So, do you want to talk about how this process kind of you adapted that for those independent kind of projects?
Well, for the independent process, we had a number of courses that were not in WordPress but had to be converted to the WordPress platform. So one of the things that I did is that I broke the work down into these 3 different steps. So I would go through what those student learning goals were, what the assessments were, how the course was outlined, and chunk it up in a way that depending on the load of, design elements or learning objects that had to be built, if I had to have someone else to come in and just have those conversations, what is with those individuals, what is your particular workload between this day or this date and this date? How can you work with others to kind of weave yourself in to what it is that they are already doing. Because in working with teams and also in working with that, one of the things that I had to work with is I had to make sure that I was not pushing anyone from another part of our office past what would be considered their capacity to their capacity of work for a particular time period. So it's a very a delicate kind of case by case kind of process where you have to really ask people, how much time would you have in order to assist me with this? Because those types of projects are definitely time consuming when there are not as many people involved to assist.
Okay, thank you. That helps
Yeah.
kind of putting things into perspective.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And I'd just like to say too, I really think that this process, the spirit of it, doesn't depend on having like a whole team around you. I mean, the idea of just developing learning objectives, then brainstorming those assessments with the subject matter expert, and then lastly, talking about how you're going to approach the content. How's it going to be organized? How can you or the faculty provide imagery or design around the course, use existing videos or create new videos? That process can be led by one person. We feel really lucky to have a lot of these resources in our office. But you can use that same planning process for an independent project.